In today's episode, you're going to hear how Michael Erath scaled his family's business from $8 million to $45 million, lost it all during the Great Recession, including discovering his business partner had committed fraud, and then built it all back up again, smarter and stronger. Now Michael is one of the most respected voices in business growth, having developed his own framework, the 5 Obsessions of Elite Organizations, that helps companies stop hitting the same ceilings and start scaling sustainably. He's done it by breaking away from rigid one-size-fits-all operating systems to build something much more adaptable and human-centered. In this conversation, we unpack why so many prescriptive systems fail in the real world, how elite organizations balance performance and loyalty, and why your purpose alone won't save your cash flow. We also explore Michael's perspective on decision-making, leadership expectations, and why enabling failure isn't a noble cause. If you've ever felt stuck between wanting to scale your business and feeling trapped by the systems that aren't working, or if you just want to level up your leadership game, you're going to take away a ton from this episode. Let's dive in. Michael, I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, Mike, thanks. It's great to be here.
So I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast. And one of the things that, whether it's YPO or EO buddies, have always said to me, and it doesn't matter whether it's, EOS, the traction, the entrepreneurial operating system, or back in the day it was Rockefeller habits, or I think scaling up, these highly prescriptive systems that have this format that is effectively like, okay, you have to do it exactly as written. And everyone I know that's tried to do that has gotten super frustrated and said, like, I did it for a while, but it didn't really work. And we had existing systems in place. And then we tried to replace it with this new system that we brought in from EOS, but then everyone got frustrated because, we liked some of the systems. And so that's what I hear out in the market.
Right.
What's your take?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And this was something. So I was a former EOS user in one of my businesses, but I took a very hybrid approach to it. I self-implemented, which allowed me to be as flexible as I wanted. And in fact, there were a number of tools where I felt like I could accomplish the same thing with a different tool from a different system that for me and for my business just fit better. And so a little bit of my backstory, in 2015, when I exited my second business, I decided to transition into coaching and consulting, and I became an EOS implementer. I did that for almost 6 years.
Right.
And one of the frustrations that I had and a number of clients had was the kind of the prescriptive one-size-fits-all nature of, I think, business operating systems in general. And what really, when I set out to build and evolve the next level growth approach and methodology around these 5 obsessions of elite organizations, what really became clear to me is that with most business operating systems, by nature, they put primacy on the system, not the user. And I think that doesn't scale over time. It may feel like a fit for a period of time, but it doesn't scale and evolve. And so my entire philosophy was to build a framework that's flexible and customizable, that's based in the same principles, but by taking a principle-based approach, always puts primacy on the user and on outcomes and results. And the business operating system that you're left with is very custom tailored to the individual organization. And it's always secondary, not primary.
Got it. And yeah, if you're listening to this right now and you're like, oh, I've used EOS, I love EOS, or we're doing scaling up and it's fine. Hey, I don't think Michael or I are saying these systems don't work. I mean, They're good. I think that trying to follow them to the letter kind of misses the point of them. It's like, I think they're a good starting point. What I hear you saying is like, well, hey, I was a certified EOS trainer. I've done a lot of these things in my own businesses. And from that, after 6 years, you would have enough experience to be able to say, I see what works and I see what doesn't. And really the focus needs to be on the user, not on the system. I think that's what I hear you saying.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so when you discovered that, right, you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I've run successful companies. I've helped a whole bunch of successful companies with these very prescriptive formats. I think there's a better way. So how did you come up with the 5 obsessions? How do we go from there could be a better way to I know the 5 obsessions are that way?
This was something that really evolved over time. And there was a period of time where after private equity bought EOS, they transitioned from a license agreement model where they were licensing IP to a franchise model.
Okay.
And that was kind of a disruption that hit the community of EOS implementers. And there were a handful of us that broke off kind of at that time. And the franchise model, we just were no longer really values aligned. So there were three of us originally, myself, Greg Cleary, and Dwayne Marshall, who in late 2019 started to really kind of focus on, well, what do we do next? Where do we go from here? And that's where this whole idea kind of evolved from. And they went off and did their thing, and I did my thing with Next Level Growth. But what it really, I think, boils down to is looking across the best of the best organizations we've worked with, even looking outside at other really elite organizations, trying to understand what is at the core of what they obsess about and what they focus on. And there was Nick Saban is a well-known in the U.S. former professional, but also college football coach. And there's a very short speech on our YouTube channel. In fact, if you want to put this in the show notes,
we'll do that.
It's a great short speech, but he basically talks about, we all have 5 choices in life. And he says, we can basically, the first choice, we can choose to be bad at what we do. And sadly, some people do that.
Sure.
They choose to be bad. We can choose to be average at what we can do. We can choose to be good at what we do. And most people tend to stop at good. But he said, you can also choose to be excellent, or you can choose to be elite. But if you choose to be excellent or elite, you have to have a special discipline and focus and drive and passion to do things to a high level and a high standard all of the time, or you never really get past good. And it just, this vision of like truly being elite really resonated with me. And so as I started thinking that through, whether you look at truly elite, like dynasty sports organizations, or you look at truly elite businesses and entrepreneurs, one of the commonalities I have found is these 5 core obsessions or principles that they truly obsess about. They're that intense about it. And it's filling the organization with great people, the first obsession, but then also aligning and motivating those people around an inspiring purpose. The third is equipping them with optimized playbooks. The fourth is building a true culture of performance that really is clear expectations. It's coaching people where they need coaching and development, but it's also coaching people out who are not capable of being coached up and not tolerating mediocrity. And then the fifth and final is growing profits and cash flow and really obsessing about the financial model underlying the business. I think one area that I differ with a lot of business coaches and consultants, and I hear this all the time, is that profit is a byproduct of doing everything else right. And I personally believe if you really want to build something elite that's intellectually lazy, I think you have to be intentional about your pricing strategy, your cash conversion cycles. Do you give discounts? And if so, do you understand how much discounts cannibalize gross profit while you're still spending the same OpEx and you're really cannibalizing your cash flow? You have to be intentional about those things. And so that's kind of how we've built this model. And so that's the framework. And then within that, we have created our own tools. We've taken tools and concepts from other published authors and thought leaders and really curated. We kind of, in EOS, we talked about the toolbox, the 20 tools in EOS. And we kind of took the mindset, well, we'd rather have a tool shed. And nobody uses all of the tools we have, but we've curated nearly 100 different tools now. So for example, if there's something that we're working on with a company to build out some of the concepts behind great people, if there's certain tools that don't work well for them or feel off to them, we have other things we can introduce that accomplish the same outcomes. And so we work with them to custom tailor. Is it an A-player assessment? EOS uses the people analyzer. Like there's lots of different ways to go about it.
Yeah.
And there doesn't have to just be one way.
What I find fascinating, what you just said, particularly there's 2 things that really speak to me. So one is this concept. I think the first 3, I think most people can buy into, right? Like, got to find great people, you need to inspire them with purpose, and you need to have great systems, right? You have optimized playbooks. And I know in your model, it's the top 3 most important systems in your business really need to be in solid playbooks. I think the last 2 are really interesting because Netflix, when its book came out, one of the things they said about a culture of performance is if you think your business is a family, then you will never get a culture of performance because you will value loyalty over outcome.
Right.
And Netflix said, we're a professional sports team. So we're super loyal to you, but you have to perform. And if you can't perform, we'll trade you. And we will bring in somebody from another team who can deliver at the level of performance that is required at that role. And if you're not willing to do that, if you value loyalty over performance, then your business, well, it won't scale and you'll always kind of struggle. And I think the other thing that can occur is this issue around the great performers in your organization are going to see that you tolerate mediocrity.
Exactly. There was, so at the Genius Network annual event last year, Dr. Jordan Peterson was one of the guests that Joe Polish interviewed, and he made a statement. He was talking about his team and the entourage that follows him around on all of his speaking tours and the caliber of which he has surrounded himself with. And he made this comment that resonated with me so much, and I feel like is so applicable to so many organizations that we see and work with, that I actually, in all of our meeting rooms, and it's a quote over one of our whiteboards, it's in every one of our meeting rooms. He said, enabling failure is not a noble cause. And I thought, how clear and brilliantly stated is that, right? We think because it's loyalty or we want to be nice or whatever the case may be, that we accept mediocre performance. And I think you can build an average organization and have that as your standard, but you will never build something that is truly a category of one business, a truly elite organization, if you think that you're doing good by people and accepting mediocrity. And I think, you talked about, is it loyalty or performance? And I think in reality, you can appreciate both. And, when somebody's not capable of continuing to level up as the organization scales, if they're better off in another organization, we can still love them and care about them. But I also think if you keep someone in a role where they're underperforming, they know that they're underperforming. They feel the pressure of that. The organization knows that they are. And I think we're kind of robbing them of some of their life by keeping them in a role that they're not well suited for. And it doesn't mean we don't coach and develop. And some people are coachable and able to level up. But at some point in time, they may just not have the aptitude for what the role requires at some future state.
Well, and the challenge too is that most people will pick a bad scenario over uncertainty.
Yes.
And so even when they're not performing and they know they're not performing and they don't know, and they've gotten the coaching and the development, but it's just not a right role fit for them. And they could be successful somewhere else. There's this piece of like, well, I don't know where that somewhere else is. And so they stay because that's better, even though it doesn't sound great. It's better than uncertainty, than going to nothingness, really.
Well, that's a wonderful point. And I think it actually goes in both directions, right? Not only would the employee hang on and not self-select and leave, but oftentimes the leader will keep the devil they know,
right,
versus trying to refill the position. And normally what that tells me, and this goes back to really thinking about your business as a compilation of systems. If I encounter a leader or manager who is hesitant to exit someone or coach someone out who needs it, it almost always tells me without them saying it that they do not have a good recruiting system to recruit, hire, and onboard true A players. And there's a great quote. I've heard it attributed to Edwards Deming, but in the research for my book, I found it attributed to a healthcare CFO named Paul Batalden, that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Right? If you want a better system, if you want a better result, you need a better system.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I mean, when I look back on the last 25 years, anytime I've delayed making a change and then made the change, I can look back and realize that I was delaying for that very reason, that having somebody in the role who was not performing at the level that the organization needed felt better than having to go to market and try to find someone. The other thing you said, which I think is really important to underscore, is this piece around profits and cash flow. This belief that, as you said, I think what I heard you say is that there's a belief out in the market, hey, just have a great company, have purpose, have vision, and it'll all work out. And that, profits and cash flow will just sort of magically, it'll all be fine. Is that what I heard? Right.
Basically, yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, I've heard that too. But the reality that I've seen both in businesses we support and in friends that own companies and in my own company is that, things like margins, gross margin, understanding your operating expenses, understanding your, as you say, your cash conversion cycle, your cash flow forecasting, your terms that you give your clients that you get from your suppliers and vendors have a tremendous effect on your cash flow, and your purpose is going to do nothing for that. And similarly, you could say we have a business with a great vision, a great mission, a great purpose. and our gross margin is too low and we have a bloated OPEX. And so we're losing money, but I feel
Mhm.
like I'm doing all the right things out there in the world and we've got this great mission, but somehow the money isn't there.
Yeah. So when we hear things, when I hear things like that, it speaks to the fact that the person saying that lacks the financial literacy
Yeah.
they need to really get their arms around the problem. And I think one of the things we do often as entrepreneurs is we feel like we have to have all the answers. We feel like we should know it all. And it makes us reluctant to reach out for help. That said, I don't know any entrepreneur who hasn't needed help in various ways throughout their entire journey. And the most successful ones get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They reach out for the help they need. They recognize that early. But I think back to what you're saying about purpose is if you truly believe in your purpose and you're truly passionate about it, the fuel that you put back in the engine to achieve more of your purpose is your profit and cash flow.
Right.
So why would you not prioritize that, not for the reasons of necessarily maximizing your own wealth or shareholder value, but for the ability to reinvest in and accomplish even more of your purpose to a greater scale and on a grander scale?
I first heard this, I'm going to say it's probably 18, 19 years ago from a gentleman by the name of Neville Joffe, who teaches financial education using a board game. And one of the things that he says at the beginning of this board game is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash flow is oxygen.
Okay. I like that. It is. It absolutely is, right?
And I think, if you think about that, it's like a lot of people are chasing revenue. And they're not getting the profitability. So they've got the vanity metric. They don't have the sanity metric. And then their cash flow is struggling, even though it looks like the business is doing well because it's growing on a top line level. But all of a sudden they're like, oh, but we're hemorrhaging cash. Our cash conversion cycle doesn't work. And the more we scale, the worse this is getting.
Yeah. And I think, kind of following on that, you hear people a lot of times say, well, sales solves a lot of problems. I think no, sales hides a lot of problems. Yeah. I think net cash flow solves a lot of problems,
so
right?
True.
And so, so definitely.
I think that, when you say that the businesses will always have problems, it's funny because Tony Robbins actually said, he's like, businesses with no problems are out of business. Businesses with recurring problems, so the same problem keeps happening, yeah, they actually have a problem. They're not dealing with the core issues of their business. But he's like, businesses with new and novel problems, those are businesses that tend to be growing and scaling. And the fact that you've grown to this next level means you've earned the right to have that problem. Yes. Because when you were smaller, you hadn't earned it yet. You had not earned the right to have the problem that you currently have now that you've scaled your company.
Right. No, exactly. And I think most of the problems is where the opportunities lie. And most organizations, as they scale, encounter similar problems to their competitors at the same scale. And so if you really adopt a possibility mindset and work to overcome those challenges and obstacles, it can give you competitive advantage, especially if you're continually in that mindset of really searching out what the problems are and not pretending they don't exist. And then, Jim Collins talks about in the Stockdale Paradox, this whole idea of confronting the brutal facts. And it's an exercise we actually do every year in our annual planning with clients, is we take them through this confronting the brutal facts exercise. And we always make sure that when we build out annual growth plans, we always address the outputs of those brutal facts in the coming year's annual plan. Because what I never want to see happen is all of our growth goals are around aspiration.
Right.
And we're not actually solving and fixing some of the things that need to be fixed, because as we scale, those problems will only get more difficult to solve.
Right. It's an interesting balance too, because I forget who said this, but like no one's ever problem solved their way to greatness before. So all you do in your business is spend all your time worrying about all the various problems and trying to fix those. That is not the way to success, right? The way to success is if these are fundamental problems that are getting in the way of us moving the organization forward, we should probably look at those. But all the little, somebody said this to me, it was used in a therapy context, but I love it for business. Worry about, if you're juggling, worry about the glass balls and let the plastic ones fall to the ground.
It's an interesting point. So another approach that we take, it's an evolution to a SWOT analysis, but we focus on, and we do this on the same kind of annual basis, but strengths, weaknesses, ends, and things to stop.
Okay.
And so to your point about the problem solving, I think there are often things that it may be a problem, but it doesn't slow down our flywheel.
Right.
It doesn't affect our client experience or customer experience. It doesn't really negatively impact our financial model and results. So maybe it's a problem we're just okay to live with.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's hard, right? Because I always find this, and to use the EOS terminology, like the difference between a visionary and an integrator, and then for the rest of the world, CEO, COO. So, a COO's job is to worry about execution, the day-to-day running of the organization, right? And the CEO's job is rivers of cash, what's our vision, what's our purpose, where's our culture at, and where am I steering this ship of the organization? And where the tension can be is the entrepreneur or the CEO is like, I just want to go, go, go. Mm-hmm. And the COO is like, cool, but we have to have the systems in place to support that growth. There's a time at which you can over systemize a business where actually the systems themselves are actually getting in the way of people being able to make good decisions because they've been so constrained within this box that they're like, oh, you have to, do all these processes and procedures. And what I find really smart leaders do in large organizations is they build influence and persuasion with people that are in cross-functional departments so that if there are dumb systems that somebody has decided to put into place, you can always get around it if you've got a great relationship with somebody from another division in your company, where they're like, yeah, that's the way we're supposed to do it, but we can also do it another way. And they'll actually kind of guide you through the bureaucracy that can occur. So I think, as I hear you saying all this, I also hear this like cautionary tale of like, yes, you need systems, but don't put so many systems in where you grind the business to a halt.
Right. And I think, so there's a couple of things in there. I think you've got to have a culture where you invite pushback and feedback from people in the organization. And it goes back to, I think, as an organization, and this is part of what we teach in terms of the strategic vision, is to what are we going to give primacy as an organization? Right. And so, for example, in our coaching and consulting business, in scaling up, there's a concept called a one-phrase strategy. And it's about really distilling the essence of your strategy and how you differentiate yourself into a very simple phrase that people can remember. The example they give with in the book is Southwest Airlines. Their one-phrase strategy was wheels up. And you can read about that in the book. For us, we really differentiate ourselves on experience. And so our one-phrase strategy is experience matters. It's just those two words. But we've basically got 5 different pillars around which we internally assess that and measure and focus. And so, like any business, we've got playbooks built out. We've got systems and structures in place. But as the CEO and the founder, I'm always inviting pushback if we or I have developed a system or a structure in the business that someone else sees as getting in the way of what we intend and mean by experience matters. That needs to get called out because it's not the intent. But oftentimes these systems, these processes inside of businesses that become choke points were established with good intentions, but not necessarily through the lens of how it affects other departments, teams, people. And so you've got to have that kind of healthy, almost like you're mining for conflict and where those sticking points are, or obstacles or choke points.
And it's funny because sometimes it's number of people in the decision, right? Like the systems are fine, but I've seen organizations where they're so inclusive and they've said, listen, we want to have as many people at the table to help to support this decision. But there's so many people that all of a sudden it becomes a democracy and yet nobody can agree. And so it isn't the system, it's actually looking and saying, okay, well, there's 12 people in the room. 3 of them have deep information relative to this decision, and 9 of them have an opinion.
Right. So this is interesting. So I would almost go back and say that in and of itself is a systems problem. Okay. Because you don't have a clear system to determine who owns the decision. Okay. And so a big piece of our whole great people component is around clear expectations. And I'm a big believer that most of our frustrations with people within teams is a result of uncommunicated expectations. Okay. And so if we can clarify that, and so one of the things we teach, and so I thought as an evolution when I was using EOS and to your point earlier, I mean, I attribute a lot of the success I had in my second business to what I got out of using EOS, even though I was kind of hybridizing how I used it. But the whole issues resolution process, the identify, discuss, solve, was very helpful to create a better framework. We've taken that a little bit further. And when we've got a team working through a challenge, what we try to do is, first of all, clarify, is this a brainstorming issue because I'm stuck and I'm not sure what to do? In which case I need to invite feedback from the team. Or is this more of an acute problem to solve? So an acute problem to solve, an example might be in an executive team meeting for a director of operations to say, we've got sales team members that are not following the sales playbook, and we're getting orders handed off to us that are incomplete that we can't do anything with.
Right.
That's an acute problem to solve.
Yeah.
So if it's an acute problem, whose problem is it? In that case, it's the director of operations. The second question is, who are you talking to, or who owns the decision? The sales manager does. Nobody else owns that decision.
Right.
And so, all right, so the last thing we'll clarify before we open it up for discussion is, what is the outcome you want to get to if we're going to give this time today? And so once all of that context is clearly communicated, we can then discuss anything we need to about it, but it becomes a very focused conversation versus kind of rambling on and people pontificating, because we've already clarified this is the outcome we want to get to if we're going to talk about this today. And we've established who owns the decision. So if I'm facilitating that, and Mike, you're the director of operations, say, okay, and Alice is the sales manager. So Mike, what do you need from Alice in order to get solved on this? And you're going to articulate to her what you need. We may not even have to talk about it at that point. She may just come back and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to look into that. I'll get them back on point with the correct handoff process. Move on, right? But really clarifying who owns that decision so that we don't get stuck in this whole, we're going to vote on it and be democratic, right? Because very rarely is that the right path forward in an organization.
I think the other thing that comes up for me as you're saying that is, there's a lot of leaders in organizations that are hoping they'll get the decision-making power one day. Like, oh, I never feel like I get to own the decision. I'm consultant on it. Like, I really feel like it's time for me to be empowered and have the decision. And, our response to them is, okay, you understand that having the ability to make this decision comes with a significant responsibility. Now you've got to consult all the stakeholders that are impacted or have information that'll help to support this decision. And if you think getting the power to have the decision is going to be faster, that's always a thing. If I could just make the decision, then we could move so much faster. It's like, well, as soon as you have the power to make the decision, now you got to slow down.
Right.
Which is why it was taking time already. If you're curious, in the background, you've got to consult a lot of people to make sure you're making the right decision, because you don't have line of sight into all the cross-functional areas that are affected by the decision you're about to make.
Right. And you then also own the implementation of and the outcomes of that decision that was made. And I think lots of times people don't want to think through that entire series of events, and that they really own it all the way through.
Something you said earlier really kind of sat with me when you said, at all stages of business, like, you're going to have problems in your business, right? Like, they're going to occur. And I think anyone listening to this right now who's like, well, is it people? Is it purpose? Is it playbooks? Is it culture performance? Is it, my financial metrics? I'm not sure what is holding us back. When I was getting ready for the podcast with you and doing my research on your background, I found this assessment tool that you and your team built on your website, which is really cool because it actually has questions for each of these areas. I think there's about, I think it's something like 8 to 10 questions for each area that you can go and fill in on your website. And then once you've done that, you can actually get a score that gives you a sense of where you should start, or where most likely the areas are that you're going to actually need support at this place in your business. It'll be different than maybe you thought. When you look historically in your business and the challenges you've had to face, this will give you more of like a future focus, or at least present tense version, filling out that assessment. And we'll put the assessment, we'll put a link to the assessment in this show notes, because then if you're hearing this right now, I'll make it easy for you. Click on the assessment. It's very well done. And that might help people who are kind of like, hey, I know I haven't got it all sorted out, but I don't know where to start.
Right. And a follow-up to that. So, so the assessment is 10 questions for each of the obsessions. So 50 questions in total. And we will, for anybody that wants it, you can select from our team of partners at the end of that assessment. Any of our partners would be happy to spend half an hour on a call just to help anyone who's taken the assessment if you're willing to buy the book and use that as a resource and a guide, they'll spend half an hour on a call with you to go over the assessment, help point you in the direction of some resources.
Yeah.
And we do that. It's interesting. So we really internally and externally talk about not having a sales process. We have a confirmation process.
Right.
And so for anybody we do that with, there's no pressure and there's no pitch. It's just, we'll try to help you with that. And people who go deep enough down the rabbit hole with the book, with my AI clone, which is a companion to the book, with the assessment and tools like that, if they find their way back to us and feel like there's value in hiring a full-time coach, they'll reach out to us. We really wanted to curate an environment where even companies that are either too small, they're too early stage to be able to afford working with us, or they just want to do it themselves, which is perfectly fine too. We wanted to create an environment or an ecosystem where between the book, the clone, the downloadable resources, we're giving that. I mean, that was one of the things I thought was really brilliant that Gino did when he wrote Traction was he gave enough of it away that you can get significant value doing it on your own.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really, really brilliant strategy because it made the brand and the content more accessible and sticky. So with an evolved, more of a principled framework, we've tried to accomplish the same thing.
I love that the trade-off is just buy the book and we'll spend half an hour going through your assessment. That feels like a very fair, very generous trade. Okay, you said AI clone twice now, so I'm not letting that go.
Yes.
So
okay,
tell us about that journey, because I've played with your AI clone, and as I said to you before we jumped on the pod today, I'm like, it's really impressive, like far exceeded my expectations. So how does that clone actually work?
So the clone, I appreciate you asking, the clone has been trained on everything I've ever written, every interview I've ever done, the books I've written, the collateral that we have for our clients. And the clone can be accessed through the website, askmichaelerath.com. There's also links in the book and through our website. And it was really designed. So as I mentioned, I self-implemented EOS and I used the book. Until now, people could either buy a book and try to implement what's in the book, or they could hire a coach. So a lot of products have kind of a good, better, best offering. So in our world, there's typically the good, which is the book, and there's the best, which is the coach, but there's no better in the middle.
Right.
And so the idea was if somebody reads the book and finds things in there that are valuable that they would like to implement in their own organization, but they have questions and they're not quite sure how to really custom tailor it for themselves and for their organization and circumstances, they can go in and have conversations with the clone to get insights and guidance that they can't get just from the book or downloading resources or reading blogs that are very near what they would get with one-on-one full-time coaching. So it kind of solves for that middle ground.
I was honestly blown away. Like I have a very high bar, high threshold for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm going to push this thing. I'm going to push this clone and give it a real live scenario and see how the interaction goes back and forth. And I was very pleasantly surprised. Michael, I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. And especially because you had a choice. The clone could have been here and you were here for us directly. And I deeply appreciate that, my friend. Thank you for making time to be on the podcast.
Mike, I appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.